The day of the pour for the footings had arrived, or strip foundations, if you will. The concrete was booked for the afternoon, and before that the ground workers had to finish the last trench, and building control were going to come round to ensure that they were happy. I'm not sure what they were going to do if building control said they weren't happy, but there we go. When the building control inspector did arrive, he was actually happy with the depth and said that when we do the slab, we also need a radon sump to be put in underneath, which was a surprise to me because the radon's not particularly that high where I live. But anyway, there we go. He was happy for things to continue. There were 3 cement mixer loads in total. The first arrived at 2 o'clock, second at 2:30. The last one was a bit delayed at 4:30. We had 2.5 loads, so being 8 cubic metre lorries, I estimate these footings are about 20 cubic metres of concrete in total. Having the digger there made the whole process a breeze. I can't imagine having to do this with shovels in elbow grease. The digger driver's skills really shone through because the dexterity you need to be able to push the concrete around a 90-degree corner while sitting 90 degrees to the digger arm with full slew on and position 45 degrees to the trenches. This guy makes it look effortless, but I was particularly impressed. You can see there were definitely years of experience on show there. These guys basically smashed it out in 3 hours, and I probably would have made a mess of it over several days. There were a few rocks and clumps of mud absorbed into the concrete, but there's a hefty mass of concrete there in totality. There weren't any sizable tree roots in the trenches. Everyone's been basically telling me that going as deep as 1.65 metres or 1.5 metres, as it turned out, was overkill. And I agree. It's basically one of the conditions from building control. I mean, even the inspector said it was overkill to go that deep for such a building as this. So basically, I paid an extra £2,000 to have the privilege of going half a metre deeper, to be told by everyone it wasn't necessary. But there we go. It's still nice to know that this building isn't going to go anywhere for any time soon. Is it cracking? No, I think it's just tide marks. A bit cracking along there. Down there, these are kind of the edges, I guess. This water's, when they're washing out they'd wash out the cement mixer chute into the trench. Yeah, there's a bit of cracking there actually. Ideal, but then I think they'll be paying more attention when it comes to the actual slab. This was the wide bit. Tiny bit over there. One of my sons was like, "Dad, let's go and throw rocks in the concrete." And I said, "Please don't." And then all the excess got dumped. I'm starting to get an idea about the scale of this building. I think it looks big. Maybe stick 2 defenders in there. Probably start looking a bit pokey, feeling a bit pokey inside. Once the concrete had started curing, gone off, I broke up the excess that they'd spread out over the centre of where the slab was going to go, so that the oversight had a uniform surface to be compacted over, just as a way of trying to mitigate any potential for the slab cracking. At this stage I wasn't really sure how much the slab would be liable to crack, so every little helps from my perspective. And we now had a nice remote control car racetrack where I was able to show off my driving skills whilst trying to film. Oh, sorry. Seeing as the radon sump was now required, I took this upon myself. I didn't want to have to pay extra to the builders, and I knew it'd have to be planned out where the blockwork was going to go to follow, so I had to make sure the gaps were in the right place. So I set about trying to measure out where was the centre of the building, where was the trench going to go, how I was going to do it with the pipes and the soil pipes. So I had to figure all that out before the blockwork started. So what was the blockwork for? Well, you could do this with shuttering, to shutter in the slab, but essentially what they've done is dig the foundations a bit wider with the trenches, build up blocks, and that then becomes the shuttering. They build up the first 2 levels of blocks. They can then power flow into the corners, and that was their way of doing it. So the slab is slightly less. I mean, maybe it's a way of saving on concrete, I don't know. But this was basically what the decision I was kind of agreed to in the first 10 minutes of meeting with the contractor. From their perspective, they labelled it as being a bit simpler. Essentially, we'd first started off it being bricks, which would have been double thickness of bricks and about 2 or 3 times as many courses, and that's what the $7,000 quote was for. And I was like, you what? And essentially they said there's no going back from that, because they'd dug the foundations wider and they wouldn't be able to shutter it up very easily from that moment. So I was kind of committed to this technique. We basically replaced those bricks with blocks, and that turned out to be 1,800 quid to get these blocks done. I had put in the spec, the scope of works, that I needed a dwarf wall, like a row of blocks or bricks on top of the slab to build the stud wall on top of. So the contractor accepted that and said that I'd only have to pay for the 2 blocks around the bottom. He would pay for the blocks along the top. Although in the end, 1,800 quid divides quite nicely by 3 courses of blocks. So I wouldn't be surprised if I've just paid for the whole lot anyway. One of the things we had to design on the hoof was where this lintel was going to go and how we were going to get the lip. The contractor suggested a lintel. It turned out that the groundworker thought that he was going to be casting the slab right to the full edge. But anyway, we ended up with a lintel. And I have to say, I don't mind paying extra, because this block work was absolutely incredible, excellent. The dimensions were completely exact. 7 metres in one way, 9 metres the other direction. The door was bang on 5 metres open. They got it, the door shifted to one end, but not too far, as enough for space. And everything was plumb, everything was level. The mortar looked great. It was an incredible piece of work. Knowing that these blocks were going to be part of the slab, I wanted them to be as strong as possible, as solid as possible. And it was hot, it was hot summer weather, so I spent quite a bit of time watering down the blocks, keeping them moist, keeping them damp, giving the cement a chance to cure in the presence of water without actually drying out and cracking. So it's been 3 days now. I've been watering it. I haven't watered it today, but basically 2 solid days of watering. This thing's solid. Can't even hear any vibration. I mean, it was always going to be solid. But I've looked around all the joints. No cracking whatsoever. And it's been like 29 degrees, 24 degrees and full sun ever since this has been laid. Both sides. So that's given me a lot of confidence potentially for basically the process I need to enact when it comes to the slab. Stopping the slab from cracking. I don't really want it to crack if at all possible, because really when you're watering you're trying to prevent shrinkage. The only place we've got something is under this lintel, which is the doorway, kind of all the way along. Bit of shrinkage there. When it was still wet I was kind of pushing them in with my thumb, but that's the only bit I can see. And there's a slight bit along there. If the slab cracks like that, that's no drama, because I'm going to put some kind of coating on the floor anyway. I just don't want big massive cracks. See, there's a bit of a crack there. That's not the end of the world on the slab, but certainly I'm going to try and mitigate it with a watering strategy, particularly because it's peak summer. So this is basically floor level. We're going to have aggregate to around here. The slab's going to be 8 inches, 200mm, which is about that, just above this line here, because these are 2,150 or 215, sorry, millimeters high. That's going to be the floor level. So they're going to power flow into the corners, and then we're going to have another set of blocks on top. Bring it up here, and then the stud wall's going to go on that, and that just keeps the stud walls off the ground. So I'm thinking DPM's probably going to have to come up into here, Then they put damp proof course, DPM up and over here, power float the concrete to the edges, put down DPC, build up the blocks, and then the stud wall goes on top of that. Or maybe they'll put DPM over there, block, DPC, and studs. We'll see how that goes. But now essentially I can see how much higher this is than ground level. There, it's about 9. This side's about 10. The slab, so this bit is about 20 mil lower. The idea is to gradually bring it up, have a step about 100 mil in, that's about there, about a centimetre step before it goes full slab, so that at least gives someone for the door to come down and for water to run out and to give a hard stop so the water can't get basically blown across the floor. So this is the finished surface for the threshold. Ground level's a bit higher this side, so this is going to have to be excavated a bit here for the driveway, but that's how I want it really, because it's sunken in more at that end, which is good for keeping, because it's a tall building, just keeping the building as low as possible really in terms of its impact. So that'll be good. And the door, personnel door, is going to be there, so I'm going to have to landscape around that bit because it's going to be an externally opening door. That's fine. Very exciting. I think this side's probably going to be the workbench side. I originally had visions of it being along that side, but it's actually quite a short bit. If I'm going to have the door there, it's quite a short bit of wall because of the door. I was thinking about before we started whether I should make the door 4 meters wide, not 5 meters, but the reason it's 5 so that I can parallel park into about here if there's like a lift going to be here. So it's a pretty big door. Also means I can get 2 vehicles out independently. That's the theory.